Guys, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. I don't normally do these types of videos, but I figured why not? Let's do it. Let's try it out. So today we're going to be talking about the top 10 best 1920s horror films. Stuff from the 1920s can be dated, but there are a lot of modern techniques that we see for the first time, or stuff that we see for the first time in cinema in general from the silent era, because it's pretty much the beginning of film. I understand if modern audiences have trouble getting into the silent era film, but there's a lot of great stuff that you should really check out, especially if you're a horror fan, because we're going to be talking about the best silent horror films, and there's a lot of creepy good stuff out there. Also, this is just my opinion, so if you don't agree or disagree, or you have another film that you think that should have been on the list, let me know that in the comments below. Said, let's just hop right into it. Coming in at number 10, we have A Page of Madness from 1926. It's a Japanese horror film with a runtime a little over an hour, and our story follows a man who takes a job at an insane asylum in hopes of trying to free his wife. The plot is kind of hard to follow because there isn't really much dialogue within the film, and it can be a little all over the place. It's more about the expressionist Japanese look and how the movie makes you feel. It makes you feel like you're descending into madness, just like the title suggests. The best way I can describe it as an avant-garde Japanese expressionist art film from the 1920s about madness, and it's scary. Fun fact for you, apparently this film was lost for about 40 years and was discovered in 1971 in some rice cans. That's really cool and impressive, because a lot of these films from the silent era are burned or destroyed or lost due to time, and that really sucks, because there's a lot of work out there that we may never see, including, I guess, honorable mention, London After Midnight, probably the most famous and most sought after horror film of all time. But A Page of Madness is super creepy, super eerie, scary imagery still. That's why I recommend it, and that's why it comes in at the number 10 spot on this list. Coming in at number 9 is a film that I've actually already reviewed on the channel before, so go check that out. But The Hunchback of Notre Dame from 1923. Everybody knows this classic story. It's the same thing, Esmeralda, Quasimodo, but this is graphic, this is gory. It's based off the 1831 novel with Lon Chaney. Lon Chaney is amazing. Great acrobatic stunt work in here, great makeup. I mean, what can you not like about this film? The only downside I really say about the film is that the runtime is a little long. It's almost a 2-hour film, so if you have a trouble of sitting through these silent horror films, kind of look out for that. But it's not that bad, because you're immersed in this world of fantasy, and there's the castles, there's the jesters, there's the, old school medieval look or whatever. It's really fun to watch and get immersed into that world, because you just fall in love with it. And Lon Chaney, again, one of the great silent actors, one of the founding fathers of horror, just absolutely kills his performance and makes this movie what it is. So if you love Lon Chaney and you have not seen this film, if you love early horror, you gotta check out The Hunchback, because he does an amazing job at this film. Now, this film, along with another film on the list, could be considered the pre-wave of the Universal Classic Monsters, starting off in the early 20s and then fizzling out into the 30s, and Monster Mash of the 40s, 50s, and so on. So yeah, it's basically responsible for helping start the Universal Classic Monsters that we all know and love. So Quasimodo is also thrown in with them for the hardcore fans, so you should definitely check it out for that reason as well. Coming in at number 8 is Faust from 1926. Faust basically follows that classic tale of a man who sells his soul to the devil, but without realizing the consequences that it leads to. Now, it's directed by F.W. Murnau, who's one of the greatest directors of all time, especially of the silent era, and the silent era of horror specifically. He does some other great stuff that we'll get to later. So not only do you have a great story, but visually, F.W. Murnau is amazing at creating these haunting atmospheres that just last forever. That these images can be burned into your mind because of how terrifying they look, and it's something to really appreciate because F.W. Murnau is an amazing director, and not many people are talking about him anymore. So it's really cool to see some of this stuff done for the first time, and special effects and all that. F.W. Murnau really nails it with Faust. The way how this film is presented is what makes this movie so creepy. Like, horror films during this time are not getting much creepier than this film, and that's thanks to F.W. Murnau. It's also rooted in German folklore with the religion, God, and the devil making the deal and all that. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check this out. But if you're just wanting some creepy, haunting imagery, just something to scare you at night, definitely check out Faust. Coming in at number 7 on the list is Dantes Inferno from 1911. Now, this is the oldest film on this list, and it's also known as Italy's first ever feature-length silent film, horror film, all that. This is the first. The story follows Dante. It's obviously based off of Dante, the Divine Comedy story from a long, long time ago. But basically, he must travel through the 9 circles of hell to reach salvation. And the story is very poetic. Now, in this movie, we get some crazy imagery. We get a 3-headed beast. We get the devil eating people. We have harpies eating the corpses of suicides. It's crazy for a film in 1911, especially, you know, with the way how the budget and the stuff that they just had to work with at that time was not anywhere near what filmmaking is like today. And we get these big spectacles. It's tons of people in this film, hundreds of extras, and it's really insane just to sit back and watch. You'll see a man who's forced to carry his own head for eternity, people half buried in flaming lava. It's insane. It sounds like actual hell. Imagery alone is enough to make you to watch this film, so definitely check out Dantes Inferno from 1911. It's definitely an experience. And number 6 is The Golem, How He Came into the World, 1920. This is another example of the German expressionist movement of film. This is an early example, especially within the horror. The Golem is a fantastic story. The story follows medieval Prague as a rabbi is creating this golem out of clay to protect the city from the Roman Empire that says the Jews must leave and they're going to take over the city. He's basically a superhero in a way. Without going too deep into the plot, after the golem saves his city from the Roman Empire, he also comes back and wreaks havoc within his own town, as you all saw that coming. But I do want to say it is photographed by Carl Freud, who ended up working for the Universal studio in the 1930s and worked on some Universal classic monsters films here and there. But you can definitely tell his influence and the way how he wanted the shots. It's directed very well, acted very well, and it's something to check out. Also, this is technically the very first ever horror trilogy. The Golem from 1915 is the original film, and then The Golem and the Dancing Girl from 1917 was the sequel, and then this film from 1920 was actually a prequel to the 1915 film. First ever horror trilogy, but the other 2 films are unfortunately lost, so we only have this one to go by, and luckily it's the prequel, so this is the beginning of the story technically. But anyways, check out The Golem, How He Came into the World from 1920. It's a great watch. We just cracked into the top 5 with The Phantom Carriage from 1921. It's a Swedish horror film based on the novel Thy Soul Shall Bear Witness. Now, this story is very similar to A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, because we have this ghost who visits this horrible person and tells them to reflect on their past and change their ways, or they're going to end up with them. And that's basically our plot. We have this guy who's out drunk on New Year's Eve instead of with his family, and this Phantom Carriage pulls up, and he's like, you need to change your ways. He takes him to look back on his past mistakes, and that's pretty much it. Obviously, it goes a little bit deeper than that, but what makes this film special is the special effects and the use of flashbacks throughout the film. And for you film nerds, this was also very influential for Stanley Kubrick when making The Shining, the scene where Jack Torrance is beating down the door with the axe. You literally see that same scene in The Phantom Carriage. Also with the use of the flashback scenes, that heavily inspired Ingmar Bergman. And you know, he is a classic director who many people love. Also, this may be the very first ever New Year's Eve horror film. After the ghostly phantom takes him through his flashbacks, he realizes he needs to become a better father, better husband, and a better friend to the people around him. It's a great film and I highly recommend it, especially that Criterion Blu-ray. Coming in at number 4, we see again Lon Chaney in The Phantom of the Opera from 1925. Again, I've already reviewed this film, so go check it out from the Monstober series, but I'll go into it a little bit. The Phantom of the Opera is basically this misfit living in the Paris Opera House who wreaks havoc within the opera house because he falls in love with the main girl, the main attraction. She obviously doesn't really like him back. So he captures her, takes him to the bottom of the Paris Opera House, and it's crazy from there on out. But what makes this movie so great is Lon Chaney. His ability to express so many different kinds of emotion without the use of dialogue underneath all that makeup is something that is really special. You also have one of the most famous scenes in all of cinema history where she reveals the Phantom's face underneath the mask, and that still holds up today, even almost 100 years later. The scenes of the actual opera house are fantastically shot. The crowds of all the extras, the angry villager mob crowd, I guess you could say, because they're not villagers, but chasing him at the end, it's amazing. It's a giant spectacle of a film that also helped kickstart the Universal Monsters cycle with Hunchback, and then this film, it's what led to Dracula. It is a must-see for horror fans, and it's within the public domain, so it's very accessible to watch. Okay, so now we're at number 3, and we have Hackson from 1922. And let me just say right off the bat, this is one of the scariest films I've ever seen in my entire life. And I've seen a lot of horror movies. I've been scared by stuff, but this is like a different level. Especially if you're a fan of folk and witchcraft horror, this one is basically like the first of that. It's part documentary, part film, but it explores witchcraft through the ages up to that point in the 1920s. So you do get to kind of see some sciences that are just wrong, basically. And that is really cool, but the imagery, and it looks like it was from the medieval times, 1600s, or whenever, of witchcraft actually happening, and that's what's so scary. You gotta watch this film in the dark, no lights, no nothing, just you and the TV with this. It'll terrify you. You see just haunting images of witches and devils and stuff that looks like classic Halloween decorations. It's just fantastic. It's really scary for me personally. I don't know what it did, but it's always stuck with me. It really is unlike anything else you would see in film history because of the part documentary, part hysteria shown by people during the witchcraft craze, and part dark imagery film. It's like all different kinds of elements put into one, and it's makes this weird movie that is unlike anything else. So if you have not seen Hackson, that is a must watch for horror fans. If you haven't seen it, you gotta check it out. It is insanely creepy and very good. At number 2 is one of the most iconic horror films of all time, Nosferatu from 1922. It is another German horror film. Lots of German horror films on this list, especially during the 1920s. They were running the show pretty much. If you're a horror fan or film fan in general and you don't know about Nosferatu, you pretty much have to have been living under a rock because it's still relevant. There's also a remake coming out this year in December. He's even featured on SpongeBob at one point. Everybody knows Nosferatu. But if you didn't know, Nosferatu is basically Dracula. They couldn't get the rights to do the Dracula film from Bram Stoker's Widow, so they changed it, tweaked it a little bit, called it Nosferatu. And yeah, we have one of the most classic horror films of all time that basically is a ripoff of Dracula. But it's great, it's fantastic, awesome acting. Max Schreck as Count Orlok is absolutely terrifying. It's still super creepy to this day, over 100 years later, and it's a must-watch. The scene of Count Orlok going up the staircase, of him rising up out of the coffins, him throwing the coffins onto the carriage, all this stuff, it just makes for a perfect horror film to watch late at night or to throw on during a Halloween party. It's fantastic. Nosferatu is it's one of the best ever. Again, shout out to F.W. Murnau. Credit to where credit is due. He absolutely nails it with this film. I think it's probably his best film overall. And yeah, the creepiness, the acting, the story, especially because it's just the Dracula, it's amazing. You got to check out Nosferatu, especially if you haven't seen it. And you got to get ready for the new film that's coming out. So check out the original from 1922. Finally coming in at the #1 spot, I think everybody saw this coming for the most part, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1920. Now many people will go ahead and tell you that this is the first definitive horror film of all time. I don't necessarily disagree with them because there was other stuff before that, like Dantes Inferno, which is also on this list. But Caligari is probably the most one that people point to and say that is where horror started. Again, what else could I say about this film that hasn't been said? German expressionism film, directed by Robert Wiene. It's just fantastic. I'll go ahead and talk about the plot just a little bit. We basically have Dr. Caligari and his somnambulist, Caesar, who's basically this sleepwalking serial killer, who's played by Conrad Veidt, and it is an absolutely astonishing, groundbreaking performance in horror history because we have tropes of the first slasher kills, the monster carrying the girl trope, just so many other stuff. The German expressionism film with the curved windows, the weird shaped houses, just adds to this world of fantasy and dreamlike atmosphere that you are submersed into. It's one of the most iconic films of all time, and they make you learn it in film classes. Even though the film is over 100 years old, I don't really want to give away the ending because if you haven't seen it for the first time, it's definitely worth the watch. This film has been talked about to death, so I'm sure you don't want to hear me talk about it anymore. But if you're thinking about picking it up on Blu-ray or 4K, definitely recommend the Eureka 4K. It's also coming out on 4K soon by Kino, which is probably going to be even better than this because Kino does a fantastic job. So, but yeah, it's also very accessible, public domain. Go check it out on YouTube or wherever. You have to check out this film if you're a horror fan. You have to. But that'll pretty much wrap it up for the video. This is the first ever top 10 list type of video I've ever done on the channel. So if you enjoyed it, let me know down in the comments below. And if you thought there was a film that should have been on here, let me know down in the comment section below as well. There were some that I wanted to throw on here, but it's just too hard. 10 films is just always so hard. But again, thank you all for the support. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.